Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with us on social media. On Twitter, follow the account @ReadingByThird, and on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. Please tweet using the hashtags Learning Tuesdays to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we will be sure to retweet. Once again, the webinar will begin shortly. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez. And before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping tips for everyone joining us. First, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. State your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are participating in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement through the chat and Q&A box. If you have any questions that come up during the webinar, please feel free to post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all who registered. And this webinar is being live streamed on our Facebook page as well. Lastly, please take the brief evaluation survey that is posted during the Q&A session. That just helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Lastly, I would just like to turn your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. We will be continuing our exploration of summertime strategies for addressing the Learning Loss Recovery Challenge next week with our webinar on February 2nd. Oh, and I'm sorry, later today on at 3 p.m., we have COVID-19 and Learning Loss 2, what the data tell us about moving forward. And sorry, this is out of order, but on Tuesday, February 9th, we have two back-to-back webinars, Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with Star City Readers, and Technology's Roles in Accelerating Learning and Recovery. We will be sure to add links to these upcoming webinars, including the one today. And joining you now is Jenny Atkinson with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thanks so much, Sierra. And I'd like to welcome all of you today to our Crucible of Practice Salon. If you've joined us for one of our first few Crucible of Practice webinars, you know we've created this series to provide a deep dive exploration into how community coalitions are approaching and moving the work to improve the early school success prospects of children from economically challenged families, neighborhoods, and communities. On the next slide, you'll see how many Campaign for Grade Level communities, grade level reading communities we have throughout the country and Canada. We have so much to learn from and with each other. We've heard about how Read by Fourth in Philadelphia uses the power of organizing in their work, and we've seen how evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence comes to life in programs for young people through Read Charlotte's work in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. Last month, we heard from coalition members in the Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading talk about how placing relationship building in the center of their work propels and guides everything they do. If you've missed any of these webinars, I encourage you to take some time to go back and listen to the recordings. You'll learn more about not only what these communities do, but how they're working to move the needle on grade level reading for children in their communities. I'll put the link to the recordings in the chat. You can find them on Clip. We are looking forward to conversations about collaboration with Star City Reads with Roanoke next month. And we just confirmed with Story County in Iowa for our April Crucible of Practice. So we have some exciting webinars coming up. And today I'm thrilled to let you know that we'll be hearing from representatives from Turn the Page KC in Kansas City, Missouri, talk about strategies they use to ensure the sustainability of the work that they're doing. So now, I'd like to introduce our moderator and presenter, Mike English. Mike joined Turn the Page KC as the organization's first executive director in 2014. He has led the development and execution of Turn the Page KC's strategic plan, which positions the organization as the backbone to a citywide collective impact initiative. In addition to making measurable progress to increase third grade reading scores during this time, Turn the Page KC has helped to catalyze several new organizations and initiatives in the city. Most recently, Mike led the creation of an out-of-school time collaborative to help raise funds in order to provide full-day childcare to 1,000 school-aged children during the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite having nothing against profit, English has worked in leadership positions at different nonprofit organizations for 20 years. He earned his undergraduate degree in philosophy from the University of Notre Dame and master's degree in public policy studies from the University of Chicago, focusing his studies on public finance. I've been a big admirer of the work happening in Kansas City for many years now, so I'm very happy that Mike and the team today are able to join us. And now I'd like to welcome Mike.
Thank you, Jenny, and thanks for inviting us to present. It's an honor to do this, and it's an honor to follow in the footsteps of other great communities like Charlotte, Philadelphia, and Sarasota. So I am the moderator, and I will also be presenting part of this presentation. But first, I just wanted to kind of give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about and give you the 5 strategies for sustainability that we have. But first, I want to point out that our organization is similar to, I think, many of those in the across the country. And just looking at the list of participants, I've talked to at least half of you over the years. And I think what we have in common with many communities is that we started as an initiative of a larger institution. So in our case, we were started by our former mayor, Sly James, and we were literally housed in City Hall in the mayor's office, and then spun out and emerged as a separate independent nonprofit organization. And so these strategies that I'm talking about are really sort of meant to provide just some, I guess, tidbits that we've learned over the years about how to make sure that we don't go away or fall apart after after our mayor had been term limited. So just real quick, I'll just kind of give you a preview of what we'll be talking about and who will be talking. So first, we've invited Sly James to discuss kind of our origin of Turn the Page KC, and also a little bit about how he was able to really tap into civic pride when he was the mayor in order to raise concern and enthusiasm about increasing the number of kids reading proficiently at 3rd grade. Kansas City is a really proud city. People who live here really love it. I'm sure that's the case in many cities, but I've lived in a lot of different places, and I've never seen a city so proud of its people like we are here in Kansas City. And so Sly did an amazing job of turning a lot of that enthusiasm for concern and support for this initiative. As I mentioned before, we were always a little concerned that once his 2 terms as mayor were over, that we would lose a lot of attention and a lot of that support that we had across the city. And so we've been really, I guess, intentional about making sure that we have a really strong, constant communications campaign. I think what's somewhat unusual about our organization is that we're very small. We have a small staff, but one of our staff members, Elle Hogan, is a real communications expert. And she spends most of her time on communications. And so I think that's really helped us sustain our work over the past few years and moving forward. Third, I'll be talking a little bit about our role as a catalyst in making sure we have catalytic impact. And what I mean by that is we wanted to make sure that, God forbid our organization went away in the future, that the work would carry on. And we've been strategic about making sure that larger institutions in our community adopt many of the same pillars in their work, so that if Turn the Page KC were not around in 10 years, there would still be many of our big organizations pursuing the work. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about collaboration also, because I think what we have tried to do over the years is put a little bit more structure to a lot of the collaboration that we've been leading in the community. And then finally, Kia Turner, who is a consultant with Turn the Page KC, will talk about how we've leveraged national expertise to build capacity in the Kansas City community, and specifically about work in the area of attendance. And so first, to kick it off, we have Sly James. So Sly was the mayor of Kansas City from 2011 to 2018. I'm just going to read 2 sentences from his bio. Sly has worn many hats over the years. He was the lead singer of a band, military police officer, He was a successful trial attorney, and most recently, he was the mayor of Kansas City from 2011 to 2019. He's never shied away from taking on tough challenges, as evidenced by how he led the Kansas City community to move the needle on third grade reading proficiency. Also, if you ever visit Kansas City, as I hope many of you have and will in the future, if you've visited in the past, you maybe haven't been super impressed by our airport. Sly was really, I think, the driving force towards building a new airport, which hopefully will be ready in the next couple of years. He also was responsible for getting a streetcar in downtown Kansas City, which is now expanding across the city. But I think one of the neatest things about him when he was mayor is that he made it a priority to read to kids in classrooms across the city. And actually it was his goal to read to students in every classroom, not every classroom, every elementary school. So he read to kids in 100 plus schools over his 8 years as mayor. And then finally, during his last year and a half, where he could have just sort of coasted, instead, he decided to lead a campaign to raise the sales tax to provide a universal pre-K in Kansas City, Missouri. Unfortunately, it failed, but I've always admired the fact that he took that on, a very kind of tough, hard campaign at the end of his term when he could have been taking it easy. He never took it easy. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sly James.
Well, first of all, let me say thanks to Mike and to all of the folks here at Grade Level Reading Campaign who have done such an excellent job of promoting something that I personally think is absolutely essential to the longevity of the workforce of this country and to helping to eliminate some of the vestiges of poverty and racism across the country. I'm very much appreciative of the work that everyone on this particular webinar is doing in order to help our children. Although our pre-K campaign failed, it was something that was necessary to at least raise the level of conversation about pre-K. I was very fortunate that when I went into office on May 1st of 2011, almost 11 years now, the very first major event that I attended was the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting in Baltimore. And I remember the event well because, first of all, the U.S. Conference of Mayors always seemed to take place on my wife's birthday, which is June 20. But on June 19, I recall meeting Ralph Smith in the hotel lobby and having a conversation with him wherein he told me about the issues related to third grade reading proficiency. Now, I'm not an educator. I was a person who was involved in politics, at least in terms of running for mayor and practicing law. Those were the issues that I was involved in up to that point, but I came from a family where education was absolutely the main focus of what our parents tried to instill in us. And so as Ralph is telling me about this, I was exceptionally intrigued by what he was saying, but I was ignorant about the realities of Kansas City. And I remember meeting Ralph on the 19th because one, it was the day before my wife's birthday, and two, it was the day before I met President Obama for the first time. So a lot of momentous occasions there. And I remember talking to Ralph for probably about an hour and having him tell me about the All-American Cities campaign and all sorts of other things related to this. So being intrigued, I came back to Kansas City and I asked, how do we find out what's going on with our third grade reading proficiency across our city? Kansas City is a large city, 418 square miles. You can fit 7 San Franciscos inside the borders of Kansas City, if that gives you any indication of its size. The other issue is that there's 475,000 people in those 418 square miles, which is a low population density, but there are 17 school districts in whole or in part in the city. The mainstay namesake school district is KCPS, Kansas City Public Schools, and then there are a couple of others that are housed wholly in Kansas City. So we came back and we put together some folks, and I worked first of all with a woman who I admire, Judy Heater, We started digging for data, and we were able to get some data that indicated that our third grade reading proficiency was absolutely dismal, and I do mean dismal. In our KCPS program, which is 95, 97% African American or Latino, probably just as many poor, if not more. The third grade reading proficiency at that time was about 19%. I was absolutely astounded by that. But then again, when I thought about it, I looked at the overlay of the city and I said 19% third grade reading proficiency. The impact of not reading in third grade is well known. It is the beginning, if not the a major step on the way to school to prison pipeline, etc. I overlaid the poverty statistics. I overlaid the crime statistics. I overlaid the statistics about educational inequities. And voila, it wasn't a surprise that we were at 19%. I considered it to be a moral obligation of this city to try to change that around. So knowing what we knew, we had to do something. So I was very fortunate. I put together a group of folks. Well, let me say I didn't put them together. I asked them to join, and they did so. I had a CEO of a major corporation, Tim Barton, Bert Berkeley, CEO of Tension Envelopes, Sandra Lawrence, the executive VP and financial officer of our major children's hospital, Judy Heater, a fantastic lawyer and the president of Pathfinder Consulting, Carol Hallquist, who is now on the State Board of Education, but at the time was at Hallmark Corporation, Uziel Pacina, an educator and professor of education and administration at the University of Missouri KC, Donna Haupt, a pastor, and Philip Hickman, an assistant superintendent out at Promise Academy, Genesis Promise Academy, and other places. And I asked them to come together and let's try to figure this out. And God bless them all, they did. And we came together and we decided that we were going to be intentional about attacking the issue of third grade reading proficiency in our city. And we did that by focusing on school readiness, school attendance, summer learning. And we also knew, and I knew from my own experience, that this was not something that was going to change overnight. This is a long slog. It takes consistency. It takes collaboration over an extended period of time. It takes being focused on the goal for an extended period of time. And I knew that I had a maximum of 8 years in the mayor's office. 8 years is not enough. So one of the first things we did was we found a friendly lawyer friend of ours who was nice enough to set us up as a 501c3 corporation. And the reason for that was so that we could have consistency beyond my 8 years in office and longevity, but also for funding. We needed outside funding, and it's easier to get funding from corporations or foundations or other organizations if you're a 501c3 charitable issue. And then we started putting together our program. I was very fortunate to be in a position in 2014 when we were looking for an executive director. We found two ridiculously qualified people. One is Mike English, a person for whom I have a great deal of regard, both professionally and personally, who has been our executive director and led this organization through its major growth spurt. And the other was Julie Holland. They both interviewed, and I thought, gee, both of these people are great. So Mike was really well suited to be the executive director of Turn the Page because of his background, his knowledge of nonprofits, et cetera. And Julie was very smart in basic educational issues. So I hired Julie to be the very first and the only education advisor to the mayor in our office at that time. Mike was then hired as well to be the executive director. So now we had a connection between the mayor's office and Turn the Page KC on a professional educational basis, people who knew how to talk that talk, what to look for, and how to move the needle forward. Then, of course, we hired people like Elle Hogan. Elle, a fantastic woman in her own right, who really does the work of telling the story of Turn the Page KC. Because one thing I do know is that if you are truly trying to build civic pride, you first of all have to tell the story as to why that civic pride is necessary. I went out talking a lot. One of the things that mayors do is they talk a lot. I was asked to talk all over the place, and I would always try to find ways to talk about Turn the Page KC. But in those instances where education was the primary topic of conversation, and I would tell people that we had only about 33% of our kids reading proficiently at grade level, I have to tell you, I was a little bit astounded and a little bit ticked off when people would kind of look at me with stone faces and act like that wasn't an important deal. So I started asking them what they would do if they only got 33% of their paycheck, or if they went out in the winter and their car only started 33% of the time, trying to wake them up to how important this was. With the help of our board, and with the help of, frankly, being able to use the bully pulpit, the mayor's office, something that I was fortunate enough to be able to do, we were able to talk about the importance of third grade reading on a large scale and get people engaged. But the main accomplishment, I think, was being able to collaborate with other entities, groups, people who had a similar interest in this area and bring together that collective impact model that Mike and the board and others have been so fantastic about guiding through the whole process. We have been fortunate. We've worked directly on issues of school attendance with our attendance forums and examining why we had problems with kids, and we had improvement in that area. We put together an initial group of page turners, volunteers who would go read, and then by collaboratively working with others, that became a whole system unto itself, where people go and sit with the same child week after week after week and read. The benefits are not just in the reading. The benefits are in Black kids sitting with white adults talking and reading and learning to care for each other, and with white kids sitting with Black adults, with Latinos sitting with Black and white adults, and building that connection beyond races, beyond genders, that break down the stereotypes that plague this country in terms of race and how race is viewed. And I can tell you that if you don't think kids at third grade or second grade or first grade are being indoctrinated by race, you're wrong, because I was one of those kids. Wasn't negative, but I was always taught, be careful how you talk to white folks, be careful what you do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the stereotypes were there. To have had contact with folks at that age, however, changed that narrative quite profoundly. So we worked our tails off to bring people together, to raise the visibility of what we were doing, to make sure that we had a stellar board of people who were engaged in the community so that they could be the voices that would go out and spread the conversation beyond just what we were talking about and into the communities that they existed in, so that we could build that network of people who understood the value of third grade reading. And by doing that and consistently working and improving our product with the help of with the board and with Mike and with Elle and others, we were able to actually receive the All-American City Award in 2017. That was a huge deal, because when we first went after this in 2011, when I came back to the office, and then we were encouraged to apply for the All-American City Award in 2012, knowing full well that we weren't quite ready. Other cities had a long jump on us. However, by applying, we got into the loop and we were able to get some technical assistance and some help. And we also saw what other people were doing, and we were able to pick some of the things that were working for, that would work for them, that might work for us, and put together our own program, which ultimately led and culminated in the award in 2017. We've accomplished a lot of things. I can tell you quite frankly that this is God's work. This is work that means tons to me. I've continued this work outside of Turn the Page with my involvement with Harvard Mayor's Leadership and Education Network and other places. But make no mistake that we are still way behind the curve. This pandemic has put us even further behind the curve. We are continuing to perpetuate the fallacies and the problems that sustain poverty, sustain ignorance, that continue to lead kids into paths where they are lacking with viable futures, where we are continuing to fail to produce kids who will become tomorrow's workers in an increasingly technological world. We have a long way to go, and we are not doing enough as a country to even come close to getting there. The idea that we expect people to go back to work, particularly women, in this pandemic era where childcare is wanting, where access to quality pre-K is non-existent in a lot of people's minds and lives, where people on the lower end of the income spectrum have no chance of getting their kids into high quality pre-K if they can find it, because they don't make nearly enough money to be able to pay $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year per child. That to them is half a year's salary. And we know these things. If we do them at the earliest possible time, we'll have an impact on our children, their ability to enter kindergarten on time, on the same level, not 30 million words behind at the age of 3, not 2 years behind at kindergarten, not behind in terms of reading proficiency at 3rd grade. We know if we do these things, we can change that narrative, and yet we still don't do them enough. I have to tell you, I'm frustrated as hell about it, and it needs to be addressed. That's what we need to be focusing on. Pre-K for the children of this country is an absolute requirement that should be met. We know these are problems. We know that this is something that we have to continue to work on. So I will tell you that my time, people always ask me, now that I'm out of office, what was the most significant? Was it the streetcar? Was it the airport? How about the hotel? How about the teams winning the World Series? All of that. And I tell them, quite frankly, that the most significant thing that I ever had the privilege of working on as the mayor of this city that I love and was honored to lead was Turn the Page KC, because that program impacts and changes the lives of kids in a way that a hotel won't, in a way that a streetcar won't, and in a way that an airport won't. All those things are important. I love all of them and all the other things we were able to accomplish. But when we look at things like infrastructure, we seldom mention human infrastructure. The infrastructure of this country lies in the people, and the future of this country lies in our children. We ought to be doing everything that we can to make sure that they have the future that they need, the skill sets that they need to flourish and compete, and the ability to take care of themselves long-term and rise from poverty into the middle class. That's the significance of Turn the Page KC. That is also the significance of what each and every one of you working on this problem is doing. We should never forget how important it is. It's not necessarily the prettiest. It's not the thing that's going to wind up on the evening news, but it is absolutely essential to the ongoing development and movement of this country. I appreciate very much the opportunity to come and talk to you about something that I love and about something that I believe is in fantastic hands with our board and Mike and Elle and others. But I appreciate most of all the opportunity to come as a person, not an educator, to talk to people who are doing everything they can to make sure that our educational system improves and takes care of people on the lower end of the spectrum. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sly. That was a very beautiful as always. And you can see how we had a distinct advantage in Kansas City when Turn the Page KC started, because Sly was our founder and our board chair. And he, as mayor, he would speak to groups at least once, maybe sometimes 3-4 times a day. And every time he's found a way to weave in 3rd grade reading proficiency into the talking points, no matter what he was talking about. And so not only that, though, his social media presence was huge. He still has something like 135,000 followers on Twitter. And so our ability to get a message out working with him has always been huge. And we never, I guess we never took that for granted. And so as his term was winding down, I really wanted to make sure that we continued to have a strong communications presence, and was really lucky to hire someone in Elle Hogan she has a master's in communications from Johns Hopkins. She used to work at Ogilvy Communications, which was a huge agency. So she's really knows her stuff. And so she's been able to use that knowledge and experience to promote our mission here locally in Kansas City. So she's going to talk a little bit about her communications strategies for ensuring our long-term sustainability. So Elle, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Hey, thank you so much, Mike. And it's always hard to follow in Sly's footsteps or in the presentation lineup, but I hope that I can do it justice. As Mike was saying, and as you just saw from seeing Sly present, we've been so fortunate that he's able to really stress the urgency and the importance of third grade reading proficiency. And so when I came to Turn the Page a little more than 2 years ago, that kind of urgency had already been communicated, but we just wanted to ensure that we were able to keep third grade reading proficiency in why it's so critical at the forefront of people's minds and in the conversation. So the priority was to have a continuous public awareness campaign. So a lot of times you'll see that a public awareness campaign is time bound, but we wanted it to really be continuous. And what that really meant was it was all about relationships. I started my career working at a nonprofit direct service organization in Charleston, South Carolina. And my first boss was Sister Mary Joseph. And she always told me that it will all come down to relationships, your success. So she was right. And so when I started at Turn the Page, I made sure to really focus on cultivating relationships with members of the media and really just get to know kind of what they wrote about, what they were looking for, how I could help them be able to tell their stories. And so that's something that we've been able to do and really make sure that third grade reading proficiency is not just a one-off story, but that it's woven into all sorts of education stories. And so that's been especially critical this year when we've been talking about remote learning and hybrid learning and how kids are being affected. We always wanted to make sure that the third grade reading proficiency is a part of that conversation as well. And that also means that we do things to kind of insert ourselves into the conversation when we don't necessarily see that opening coming for us. So Mike's great about proactively seeking out opportunities like with the Kansas City Business Journal. We also did something this year, last summer, where we knew that it was going to be a huge issue. At that time, we thought it was just going to be this widened summer learning loss. And so we produced a report that kind of highlighted the issue. And it was just a white paper. I mean, it was 2 pages. But we really highlighted the issue, who was going to be affected by this, what children in Kansas City were going to suffer the most, the recommendations that we had to kind of address this. And then that allowed us to really to get some media around releasing this report. And so that's another way that we've tried to insert ourselves into the conversation. We've also, since we aren't a direct service provider and we are this collective impact initiative, I've always thought we've always thought that it's important to find tangible ways for the public to interact with your mission. And, because why don't you come here on Monday and volunteer? Because we are more of the facilitator. And so we do that in a couple of ways. One of them is we try to work with schools. So the first picture that you see, that was, we worked with a local elementary school here that just did not have access to high quality inclusive books in the classrooms. And so we worked to build up their classroom libraries. So we had an initiative that we called 14 Libraries for Faxon. We had community groups organize themselves. We had 14 teams. They kind of had a challenge of who could collect the most books for these classrooms. They each had a classroom assigned to them. The teachers filled out a questionnaire about the type of books their kids are interested in, because we wanted to make sure these kids are really reading books that they wanted to read. And then it was kind of this community challenge that really raised awareness. And then we brought those teams in pre-COVID times to an assembly at the end of the challenge where they got to meet the students and see really the classroom libraries all set up. Our second program that we do annually is we have a summer reading splash. So what we know is that a lot of children who are at home over the summer break from school don't always have access to high quality inclusive books in their homes. So we bring kids to what was the Sprint Center, which in Kansas City, which is now the T-Mobile Center. And this event has really ballooned. So we have to separate it into a morning and afternoon session. And so we bring kids to the Sprint Center. We have a kind of hour of activities. We have Mayor James has always been great at reading a book to the kids on stage, and we have some sort of interactive element tied in. Then they come down to the Sprint Center floor. They do all sorts of reading related activities. And then by the time they leave, we have volunteers there to hand out books. And what we had done in 2019, when we were last able to host this event in person, is we saw that when kids were getting those bags of books, they really wanted certain books. You know, they'd look in the bag, and if they weren't that excited, we were kind of disappointed because we wanted to make sure they were reading these books. So we set up a free bookstore, and we had volunteers partner with the children and go through and look at the books and pick the ones that they really wanted. But one thing that's important to note about this event is that the middle is a lunch where we bring corporate sponsors and other partners and funders, and we let them see this event in action. And it's a way to have them see, you know, our mission with legs. And so that's been a great event that hopefully we could do this year. We weren't able to do it last year. And then the last thing that we do, and what we've been so fortunate to have in SLY and so many others in our community, is to identify communications ambassadors for our organization. I'm surprised it's taken us until now in a webinar to mention for the first time Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. But Patrick is an incredible proponent of Kansas City nonprofit organizations. He has a real interest in literacy, and we have been very fortunate to partner with him and his foundation, 15 of the Mahomies, on several different causes. He's supported our Inclusive Books initiative. And then most recently, we were able to work with 15 of the Mahomies to distribute hazard pay to early childhood educators who remained open during COVID. And so we were able to work with them. We've also been able to partner with the Chiefs on a Kingdom United program, which is we are bringing inclusive books into classrooms to teach certain character traits that are critical for students to be learning in these early grades. And that third picture that you see is of a barber, Joey, who has Joey cuts. And we've worked with him to kind of have these libraries in those barber shops so that he can really promote the importance of fathers reading to their children, grandparents reading to their children while he's doing haircuts. So those are just three of the ways that we've made sure to really promote the organization and our mission, and really to have this be a continuous conversation.
Thanks, Elle. So at this point, we've kind of covered the first two of our strategies for sustainability, which we're really tapping into that civic pride that Slide talked about, and then really running a continuous communications campaign that Elle leads in order to make sure that our mission is always top of mind. And also, you know, Elle runs kind of like quarterly public awareness campaigns that will focus on some of the pillars of our mission as well, on school attendance, on summer learning, on school readiness, so that these issues were just constantly getting out there in the media and on social media and in the community. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is our work as an organization that tries to make a catalytic impact. And so, you know, when people ask me what I do at my job, it's always very hard to explain. And I think, like, my family and friends probably think that what I do is get books to schools, which is certainly one of the things that we do. But I think the most meaningful work that I do and that we do at Turn the Page is in making sure that third grade reading proficiency is an initiative that is owned by the community as a whole in Kansas City. So we are looking for population level results, and to achieve those results, we cannot possibly do that through our direct service alone. We have to be very strategic about getting the community and large institutional organizations in the mix and adopting our mission. So the right here I have on the screen is a snapshot of our strategic plan. And I'm gonna actually, in the chat, I'll try to put, I'm gonna put a link to our strategic plan so that you can see it, and I'll send that right now. Initially, you know, like probably most nonprofits, we had a strategic plan that we went through a 6-month process of drafting, and we're really happy with it and turned it into a PDF. And then it just sort of like sat on my desk. And so I really wanted to make sure that this was a plan that was continually visited, updated, and tracked. And so we found a local company that was willing to work with us in order to kind of really bring it to life, a company called My Sidewalk. And what we now have is a really interactive strategic plan that is housed on our website. That what we do with that then is we compel other institutions to take responsibility for specific strategies and tactics. So this is one of our main strategies for sustainability, because in the future, over the years, these institutions will continue to promote these specific pillars of our work, whether or not we're here. 2 of them I wanted to point out in particular are in the school readiness area and the school attendance area. So in the school readiness area, this is probably one of the more challenging pillars of our work. You know, the goal is to make sure that kids start kindergarten ready to learn. And to do that requires, convincing others in the community how important this is, making sure caregivers have the resources they need to talk and sing and read with their kids each day, but also requires a lot of advocacy work. And so about probably 7 years ago, the Chamber of Commerce in Kansas City was, our Chamber of Commerce in Kansas City is a really great chamber, a powerful organization, and they did something that was unique, and they adopted a big 5, they called it, which were 5 community priorities that they were going to advocate for. And they had basically they had an opening for one of their priorities. And so we as an organization, and Sly James in particular, really pushed them to adopt kindergarten readiness as one of their priorities, which they did. And what that means is that now the chamber is sort of a partner in this focus on school readiness. And that's critical at the state level, locally in the advocacy work, but also really in bringing the business community into the fold and making sure that they're aware, the business community is aware of and working in support of our mission. And so as you dig into our strategic plan in that school readiness area, what you'll find is that some of the specific tactics we've outlined there, the institution responsible is the chamber. And so, as I mentioned before, that way, as we move along, these things keep being pushed along by these larger and powerful institutions. The other pillar I wanted to mention in this regard is school attendance. School attendance, I think, in most of our communities across the country is one of the key pillars. The idea is that if we can get kids to school more regularly, that they will be more likely to read proficiently by the end of 3rd grade. And so we have set some very specific goals on the percentage of chronic absenteeism rates that we want to reduce. And school attendance is most people think of it as a health or a school-based function, but it really is a community responsibility. You know, I've heard Ralph Smith say many times over the years that what happens outside of the school building is just as important as what happens inside the school building. And I think school attendance is a perfect example of that. And so we had been really trying to really find a great big institutional partner to help push this work. And the United Way of Kansas City really emerged as an amazing force for pushing school attendance in Kansas City, not only as a policy priority, but as a funding priority. And so now we have a United Way that is funding a lot of school attendance work in Kansas City. Those are two examples of how we have tried to, I guess, carve out responsibility for our strategies and tactics amongst key institutions in the community. The next thing I wanted to talk about is our role in incubating new organizations. And so, we've been around now for 7-8 years. Our staff is still very small. And we've kept it that way intentionally. So what we've done over the years is found that there have been certain unmet needs in our community. And two of them I wanted to mention because they're good examples of our work as an incubator, are school-based tutoring and parent leadership. So the school-based tutoring issue, we recognized that, back in 2014, the schools with the lowest reading proficiency rates in our city also had the least access to reading interventionists and/or tutors. And so we knew that in order to increase that percentage of kids reading proficiently, there had to be a solution to this, because if you're a teacher and you have, say, a class of second graders, and 18 out of the 24 second graders are reading at a kindergarten level, how on earth are you supposed to bring all of those kids up to a second grade level by the end of the year? It seems so challenging. And so what our schools really, really needed were individuals in their buildings who could provide supplemental one-on-one reading tutoring that's highly trained tutors. And so at about that time that we recognized this as a need, we also read, a couple of board members and I read an evaluation report of the Minnesota Reading Corps. And it was a really positive evaluation showing really strong effects. And so we reached out to the Literacy Lab, which is a replication partner of the Minnesota Reading Corps. The Literacy Lab is based in Washington, D.C., and they have replicated the Minnesota Reading Corps in a number of cities now. And our role became that of almost like a broker. So we brokered a deal to bring the Literacy Lab to Kansas City. And in order to do that, we had to raise a lot of money for startup costs. And we had to convince two of our bigger school districts to enter into a contract with them, because it was going to take school district money as well. And those of you who have worked in roles like this in education know how challenging it is to convince school districts to add a line item to their already strained budgets. And so we spent a good 6 months working on sending teachers and administrators from Kansas City out to, Washington, D.C. To visit schools and see the tutoring in practice. We brought some people from the Literacy Lab out to Kansas City to present to superintendents and to funders. And we were able to raise startup funds and get key school districts to sign these contracts that allowed the Literacy Lab to hire a director here and start the program. And so there are now about 50 tutors, pre-K through grade 3 tutors in elementary schools in Kansas City. So that's something, if we had tried to do that directly, start hiring and training tutors, it would have burnt us out and really diluted everything we were doing. So I'm really happy with the way we were able to kind of get that unmet need met to a certain extent without overburdening our small organization. And then the second example that I wanted to mention around this idea of incubation is the Parent Leadership Training Institute. So Sly James, when he was talking, he mentioned his education advisor, Julie Holland. And when she was the education advisor, one of the unmet needs that Julie identified was a lack of a leadership training program for parents of school-aged children in Kansas City. And so she did a lot of research and meeting with the Parent Leadership Training Institute, which is a national organization, and really became convinced that this would be an excellent way to address that unmet need in Kansas City. And so she helped us to raise some city funds. And then we at Turn the Page KC ran the first cohort, so the first class of the Parent Leadership Training Institute in Kansas City directly. So we, one of our staff people coordinated it. We hired facilitators, and we really made sure to do a good job in that first cohort, all along knowing that our goal was to spin this out as its own organization. And so after that first cohort, Julie then was available because Sly's term was up. And so she is now running the Parent Leadership Training Institute as a Kansas City organization separately, and it's growing and growing. So that program will continue to meet that unmet need. And it's not something that we have to do directly. It's something that has been started and is now separate. So those are two examples of what I call our catalytic impact. And there are probably 6 or 7 examples of how we have tried to incubate a new either organization or new program for an organization. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about before turning to our next presenter is this idea of structured collaboration. And for those of you who grew up like I did watching Monty Python movies, you might remember a scene in Monty Python, The Life of Brian, where the apostles are sitting around a table talking about how they needed to do something, and they go round and round talking about how they need to do something, and then they never do anything. They just talk about how they need to do something. That's kind of how I felt in some of our early work group meetings. So we established these community work groups for school attendance, summer learning, school readiness, community engagement, and would have lots of the key voices around the table. And we would talk about issues that we needed to address. And it was hard to figure out how we were going to do it. And because none of these people worked for Turn the Page, you have limited ability to sort of incentivize or compel people to kind of take on a new responsibility when they have their own jobs. So over the years, one of the things, and this really has crystallized during the COVID environment, because we were sort of forced to. And so what we've tried to do in some instances is put more structure to a collaborative for these work groups. And so what this example here on the screen is an example of the in-person learning sites that Jenny mentioned when she was introducing me, and several members of our summer learning work group emerged as organizations willing to run these in-person learning sites for kids that were attending virtual school. And so we then became the fiscal agent and raised money for this initiative. And then this maintained this kind of collaborative moving forward. And then we've also done this in the area of school attendance, where we, over the years, we have had many people as members of our school attendance work group. All along, we have tried to figure out how can we have a bigger impact on what is actually happening in school buildings. And so through that work group and our work with United Way and Attendance Works, we have been able to sort of forge a structured school attendance collaborative that includes the Local Investment Commission, or LINC, which is the biggest provider of before and after school care in Kansas City. And one of the really unique parts of our school attendance work here is that that organization is really amazing about making sure that their after-school site coordinators work very closely with those principals and school attendance teams to identify family issues that might be preventing kids from getting to school. We also knew we needed money to do something like this. And as I mentioned before, the United Way had made school attendance a priority, and they were willing to allocate resources to push this idea of these school attendance teams in 2 key districts. And we needed national expertise. And most of you know Hetty Chang with Attendance Works. And I'd met Hetty many times over the years, and she'd been to Kansas City to lead trainings for certain districts. And so we started working with her and Attendance Works very, very closely in order to bring that national expertise local. So we wanted to basically take a lot of her national expertise and build local capacity. And then to do that, we were able to hire or contract with a woman named Dr. Kia Turner, who is a master of working with educators. And she has been working with us and Attendance Works and United Way in order to transfer this national knowledge to our local schools. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kia. And Kia is going to talk a little bit more about how she has worked to support school attendance teams and specifically forging the buy-in and partnership with local school districts by localizing national expertise. Kia?
Thank you, Mike. You are entirely too generous, but I appreciate it. And for those of you that are here, I hope the through line that you are hearing is that partnerships are critical, not only during this time, but in general, right? You heard former Mayor Sly James talk about how he decided to spin Turn the Page KC off so that he was able to bring in more partners to help keep the organization and its mission and vision alive well beyond his, mayoral tenure. And then you heard Elle talk about the partnerships happening with schools and with corporations to get students access to literacy materials. And then you heard Mike give, kind of a big picture view of how there have been partnerships that have allowed other organizations to come into Kansas City and help address literacy and attendance and engagement. And that is the nexus of sort of where my work begins. I was a teacher for 10 years. After that, a coach and then a professor. And I've seen a lot of what happens in education from pre-K all the way through college, right? And so what's exciting to me is this ability to work with organizations like the United Way of Greater Kansas City, like Turn the Page, like Link, and especially Attendance Works, because none of us can carry the torch alone. United Way came in, just like it says on the slide, looking to help address this issue with attendance and engagement. And who knew, that this pandemic would be around the corner and that the issue would become all the more urgent. And then working with Turn the Page, Mike and Elle and their team, and being able to say, here are the school partners that we're working with currently in the Hickman Mills School District and the Center School District. And what can we do to help really build the relationships that are necessary to keep parents at the table and to keep students learning, even when we're not face-to-face. The initiative is actually in the second year. This isn't the first. And last year was in one district, and then this year we've expanded to include the other. Link has been an incredible partner because Link provides aftercare to both school districts, I believe. Yeah, both school districts, and has been great with like assembling data, helping activate their force of workers to get in touch with parents when perhaps teachers and school systems haven't been able to do that. And then Attendance Works, as you all know, is the key player here. Without their research and their work looking at what it takes to get families engaged, what are those barriers to engagement, and then presenting best practices for how to sort of go about doing this work, we wouldn't be here at all. And so all of that to say, I'm honored to be able to be here with everyone, but I need you to hear that it's not any one thing that's a silver bullet. It has been just this corporate effort to address this community need that has made the progress that we've seen possible, and every organization has contributed greatly. Attendance Works has provided a series of trainings. These were initially in person, right, when the world was young and we could see each other without masks. Provides a series of trainings, and then I am on the ground support. And so what that looks like is Attendance Works comes in, delivers concepts, really hones in on issues that are pertinent to the district and students in the area. And then I am on the ground support, going in monthly, meeting with school teams, meeting with district leadership. And it's not like it's a silver bullet. It's sort of the trainings, the initiative, the way we go about the work is really tailored to the circumstances that school districts find themselves facing. And so what works in one district may look a completely different way or similar with a few changes in another. And so for Attendance Works, they provide resources. They have provided support via these webinars now, but in-person trainings. And then I'm able to go back and forth with them and say, hey, here's what the school is facing. Do you have a resource for that? I'll give you an example. Last year, not last year, so 2020, in 2019, okay, when we first began, a lot of school districts were talking about how do we activate parents? You know, we have this relationship with our parents where that we have kids that show up and some parents who are involved, but we'd really like to see more. We'd like to be able to reach those parents that have seemed unreachable to us. And it was through the work with Attendance Works that they said, you know, well, look at the communication that you're having with those parents. You know, what does that look like? What are you saying? And what's the intent? You know what I mean? What do you mean to say? And what are you actually saying? And then have you done any thinking about the barriers to that engagement? Are parents not able to show up in your school building because of transportation? Are students not attending regularly because of health concerns? Are there concerns that are tied to the zip code that your students are from that maybe aren't being addressed? And through that sort of deep dive into the data, into community circumstances, we were able to get a better picture of what was happening from the parent lens. And it has been just eye-opening to see, oh my goodness, these very simple things that we sort of didn't give any real attention to are having a huge impact. You know, are parents feeling overwhelmed, or are they even familiar with the way that school functions? Do they know, you know, the expectation is, you know, students in person, students need to be there at this time. We had parents who were confused about the school schedule because they had multiple children in multiple buildings, or in Kansas City's case, multiple school districts, which means you may go to a charter here, a district school here, and then have a whole other option on the table. So parents were having trouble streamlining those. We had parents who were having trouble accessing immunizations for students, so then that was delaying the enrollment process. It was a lot of things that we were able to think about and help schools to think about providing solutions for via their partnerships. So it's not that even through this amazing work with Attendance Works that they have been like the end all, you know, one-stop shop, so much as they have provided the framework that have allowed school systems to say, well, who do we have on hand that could help address these concerns that we're seeing as it relates to our parents? And then, can you go to the next slide? Okay. So then the way that we sort of get that change going in the school districts has been through the creation of these school attendance teams. When I go monthly into a school building initially and now via webinar, what really I am doing is talking to the principal and key school support staff. So not teachers, right? But the principal, key school support staff are working like the counselor, the attendance clerk, school partners, you know, where applicable, the nurse, you know, getting these people, ESL coordinators in the building, sometimes SPED coordinators as well, getting these people together at the table to say, who among our students are having concerns with engagement and attendance? What do we know about them? And what can we do to better support them in this time? And so these teams are then tasked with carrying out the work, the information that they're receiving from the Attendance Works training. And as I said previously, that could look different building to building, but overall the districts are working towards the same goal. It also can look different district to district, but overall districts are working towards the same goal. And so for the attendance teams, we do a lot of work that looks like, we do a lot of work that looks like, getting down data for those students. So tracking their engagement month to month, figuring out how best to contact their parents, determining which contact with parents is most effective. Not even just contacting them, to say, hey, just so you know, Kia hasn't been in class, but thinking about, the purpose of that contact and whether or not we're providing true on-ramps for parents to tell us what's going on or to engage meaningfully with us. It's one thing to be positioned in a community and to service children from that community, in the capacity that we think of, for school teams, and that you drop your kids off to us, we educate them magically, and then send them home to you. But what COVID-19 has done is really had us think, how can we better create partnerships with those parents? See, the through line, partnerships. No one can work alone. No organization or institution can work alone, and that includes schools. And so thinking about how can we better enable parents to understand that we need them? How can we demonstrate that they have value to us and give them opportunities to display that value and add that value to our school communities? And so that's been some real eye-opening conversation as well, because typically when we begin this work and we're thinking about parent engagement, we were talking about parents coming to either the PTA or PTO and parents coming to conference. Since then, school teams have expanded their thinking beyond that to thinking about how can we activate parents and what does that look like? What does an active and engaged parent look like for our school community? And how can we recruit those? How can we also be sure that that active and engaged parent community represents all of our student population? So not just a subset, but all students are represented and all students are being considered. And so we're talking about, making sure that communication is going out in multiple languages. How do we ensure that that's done with fidelity? You know what I mean? We're talking about how are we going beyond just making phone calls to engage parents? How are we telling them, are we utilizing, United Way has even funded mini grants for the school teams, right? So school attendance teams meet monthly. They're tracking this data, they're tracking parent contact, they're looking at what works. And United Way even kicked in mini grants of $1,000 for school teams to use to think about or to pilot an engagement initiative that they want to do. This could be geared towards parents, this could be geared towards students, this could be in support of teachers. And so school attendance teams are thinking, do we need to incentivize parents at this point? Is it the students that we need to get on board? Do we need to really do more work with teachers in terms of helping them to have asset-based conversations with parents where we're not just calling to inform and say, Kia didn't come to class, but we're calling to say, hey, we have this going on. Would you like to be involved? Or, hey, can you tell us more about what you do? Would you be willing to Zoom with our students and share that? Or anything, we need parents to, back when we were in the building, to bring snacks up. Could you just bring snacks for our class or send some with Kia when you drop her off? And so the team approach has really serve to take the idea of attendance and engagement beyond that's the attendance clerk's problem, that's the teacher's problem, and made it a school-wide initiative. It's all of us. If the students aren't coming to school, that means they aren't able to learn, which impacts all of us. If families don't feel that they are a part of the school community, then students are more likely to not come to school, which means they are more likely to not learn, and they are not probably going to be reading on grade level either. That affects all of us, and it affects that student's future directly. So it can't be one person's work. It has to be all of our work. And I think that has been one of the most powerful, realizations is that Attendance Works has really pushed this idea that this is not one person's thing to own so much as it is going to take all of us with our hands stirring the pot to get this done. I see a question that says, when you start in the school, how do you get them out of the magic bullet mindset? Lord, listen, honey, and help them embrace the idea of team partnership with families. The way that we do that, number one, it's ongoing, right? So that is not a one conversation situation. That's going to take multiple conversations with school teams. But the first thing we do is look at what they're doing already and the outcomes that it's generating. So if you say, hey, Kia, parents just really seem tapped out. We are like communicating with them, and they're not coming to our things, then we talk about, what that communication looks like and what you've put into it. And when you're like, well, we put this into it, then we turn it around and take on the parent role. So, think if you are a parent and this is the communication that you were receiving, how would you react? We also dig deeper into the data. Right now, school teams are looking at, I don't know if you all are familiar with this, if you're outside of a school building, but you know, they have information management systems, you know, learning management systems. Well, within those systems, conversations with parents are typically documented, right? So we'll go through time and again, the only time parents have been contacted is when there's a concern. And so if the only communication they're receiving is, look, I froze. I'm sorry. If I froze, y'all tell me in the chat and I'll try to fix it. But if the only communication that parents are receiving says your kid isn't meeting the mark, then they're more likely to tap out. And so we start trying one change, you know what I mean? And then we introduce another change so that school teams get that it's not going to be just one thing that we can do, or we would already have done it. It's going to be a series of small changes that get us the results that we want. And that is a lot of breaking up of, you know, what can sometimes be a pretty, you know, tightly held mindset about how we go about engaging parents and engaging students. But the team approach has been one that has been effective, and one where school teams have been able to really see results where you don't have one person feeling fatigued. You know, like, oh my goodness, I have 300 kids and I'm just one attendance clerk. How am I going to do this? I have 400 kids and I'm one school counselor and one attendance clerk. How are the two of us going to do this? So when teams break that up and then follow up by providing support and additional PD to teachers, everybody owns it and we get much better results. Can you go to the next slide? Oh, look, it's just the questions. And that's great because somebody just chatted me a question. And so what I was going to say is, the point is, I'm hoping that you're hearing from all of the words here that this has been a team effort at every single level. Change itself, in order to be sticky, has to be collaborative. And that is definitely something that Attendance Works has championed, and something that is pretty important to me personally as a resident of this community, a graduate of the school system here, and then a former teacher in this same school community that I'm working in. It's really important that we understand I can't carry the initiative solely on my back. It's going to take all of us to really make the impact that we're looking to see. So if you have questions, chat them and I'll try to answer.
Thanks, Kia. That was awesome. Kia is amazing, and has did an amazing job of sort of pivoting last March when she had been, you know, coaching school attendance teams in the buildings, and then all of a sudden, everybody was desperately trying to figure out a way to make sure kids were learning virtually. And I'm going to turn it over to Jenny in a second to facilitate any questions we have, but I just wanted to make one final comment, which is that, you know, in the National Grade Level Reading Network, many of you are probably familiar with the work of Lectio, and one of the things I've always hear them mention, I think is such a great point, is we always need to make sure we know what we're trying to achieve. Are we trying to raise awareness, or are we trying to change behavior? And at Turn the Page KC, our strategies have always been to do both, but we've never underestimated how important it is to raise awareness about the issue in order to get more people in the community contributing and helping to become a part of the solution. So with that, Jenny, do you want to take the Q&A part?
Yep, thanks a lot, Mike. And thanks to all of you who presented. We have a lot to think about right now. There are a couple of questions in the chat box that I'm going to go over, but if you have any, please add them because we will have time for some additional questions. Marie O'Brien asked a question of the former mayor, Sly James, about getting him to chat with officials in Indian River County to hear his enthusiasm for this work. And I thought that, and he was gracious enough to provide his contact information to her. And then we also have some comments about how wonderful and passionate his presentation was. And so I think a question that sort of comes out of those comments is, if you are not lucky enough to have, you know, government leadership that is really taking the charge and seriously and leading the charge, do you all have any thoughts about how to engage local government officials, just from your experience of having so much engagement and leadership in government? And maybe Sly, you might have some thoughts on that as well. I'm not sure.
I was fortunate. It's one of the nice things about being mayor is that people tend to take your call. Yeah, and that's always been very good. But I think that if you don't have governmental leadership, then what you really need is corporate leadership. Try to influence the Chamber of Commerce or business groups. Make the economic case for them about workforce development. I can tell you that when we were going after Amazon, one of the issues that arose and was pretty obvious from the beginning was that we did not have an extensive enough, well-trained enough workforce with enough people in it to service them. That doesn't start when you get into the job market. That starts when you enter the world and when you enter school. So make the business case to the chamber and other influential groups like that. Women's groups are fantastic. If there's a women's foundation in your city, or a LINKS program, which is African American Women Social Organization, make the case there and see if you can get champions to come out of those areas. It's not just government, it can be from any walk of life.
Great, thank you so much for that. Anything else anyone wants to add on that question?
I would just add that in our case, Ralph Smith was instrumental, and if he's still willing to do it, I think is such a persuasive person, and really, I think a lot of people know who he is and are willing to talk with him about this initiative. In our case, I think the foundations and the funders are important in our city too, and so it's been helpful to have the buy-in from our big foundation leadership too, and I think that sometimes helps with governmental leadership as well.
That's great. Thanks to both of you on that. In the comments, Cecilia, a couple of people mentioned that they liked your Life of Brian example, Mike, and Cecilia said that the work at Turn the Page is remarkable because of the realistic understanding that this type of change takes time and long-term commitment. And I'm wondering, are there things in particular that you think you've done that have helped when you are working on something you know is a long-term issue that people aren't going to see change real quick? Are there things you've done to help keep the momentum going and help stakeholders stay engaged in that work?
I might ask Gail to comment on this too, but there are definitely things that I think there are mistakes I've made or we've made too that I think we've tried to learn from. And one of those is that, in this type of organization where you're relying on these community committees, these community work groups to really carry out the work, a big problem is that people change jobs. And so we will have these monthly or quarterly work group meetings, and we'll have lots and lots of enthusiasm, and then all of a sudden somebody's gone. And so it took some time, but I personally kind of really started to figure out that we needed more institutional buy-in rather than individual buy-in. So for certain key organizations we work with and school districts as well, it's important to get the interest and buy-in from multiple people. And then with school districts in particular, gosh, what is the average tenure of a superintendent in large urban districts? It's pretty short. And so while the buy-in of superintendents is important, it's also been a real strategy of ours to engage with curriculum directors, the community engagement directors at different school districts, have multiple touch points for these partnerships. Elle, do you have anything to add to that question about how to make sure that that we really tap into a lot of the community to get engaged with the initiative?
I would just say that constantly highlighting the relevance and the urgency is critical, as well as one of the ways that I was just going to build upon that, a partnership with school districts and charter schools that we've been able to work off of is we're lucky in Kansas City to have a great organization called Show Me KC Schools. And prior to COVID, they had very, very frequent community tours where you could go into 4 schools and kind of meet with the directors and hear about what they were doing at their schools. And so that was always an opportunity for us to see what it is they were doing and how we could partner with them. So I think that that's been important. Again, as I said in my original presentation, it all comes back to those relationships. So I think it's maintaining those and just finding ways to support each other's work, especially with those other nonprofit organizations, and seeing where there are holes and how you can work together to address those.
Great, thank you, Elle and Mike. I like the idea that so easy to lean on the super engaged person in an organization and forget that that person might move on, and that you really need to do the work of having multiple entry points and buy-in from multiple people, like you all said. So thank you for that comment. You may see that the poll has come up, so if you can answer the questions there as we continue with our Q&A, that would be great. We have a question: what data are you looking at to determine the efficacy of Turn the Page? You might have mentioned this, but how has the 33% that Mayor James mentioned changed?
Yeah, this is probably the most frustrating part about this whole initiative. So we track third grade reading proficiency by looking at our state assessment, and our state assessment for ELA is administered at the third grade level. And so the 33% number back in 2012, the percentage of students that scored proficient or above on the state assessment was 33%. And so we used that as our baseline and set a goal to increase it to 70%. And we made some significant progress. But another challenge we had is that our state started tinkering with the state assessment. About 3 years in a row, the actual assessment changed. And I believe that the cut scores changed as well, which means that we had to figure out a way to sort of try to set a standardization for the standardized test, because our city isn't big enough to be, have an oversampling from the NAEP. So the percentage, when we kind of try to standardize the standardization, has increased by about a third. So that 33% got up to over 40%. It was actually over 50% at one point. But then COVID hit. So we didn't have any state assessment last year. And then this year, I think we will have a state assessment, but as you can imagine, I would anticipate those scores being pretty low. So I think that what we are going to do is reset our baseline after this year. And so look at the 2021 state assessment scores and set that as our new baseline, and then set a new goal. But we are optimistic that we've made improvements over the years, because the number and percentage of students that have scored proficient or above has been on the rise.
Great, thanks, Mike. Looks like we have another question here. With all of the partnerships that you all have you worked to have partners co-brand those initiatives as a Turn the Page KC program?
Elle, I'm gonna let you answer that one. But I'll just introduce your answer maybe by saying that this is tricky because we are as we've talked about, we are a collective impact initiative, and we are really focused on raising awareness for the issue. And we do our best to raise awareness for the good work that's done by other organizations, and particularly through social media. We try to make sure that improvements that are made or good things that happen, we're not taking credit for other people's work while also still raising awareness for them. We have not, I don't think we have done much in the terms of co-branding with each initiative locally. I will mention though that there is a new organization in St. Louis called Turn the Page STL that we've talked to quite a bit, and they're off and running too. So, Elle, what do you think about the question about co-branding?
So that's not something that we've done. I mean, usually when we work with those organizations to help get them kind of with the incubation phase, we just ask for their participation in our community engagement work group, so that ongoing participation and partnership. But I think that would be kind of a something that we've all learned from Sly's leadership, is that it doesn't matter who gets the credit, but as long as the work gets done. And so that's kind of been our overarching philosophy, is just to, we're not so concerned about having ourselves be affiliated or front and center as we are just wanting to get the work done. So I guess the one thing that we ask people is just that they continue to participate in our community engagement work group or any other relevant work group that that we've asked them to be included in.
That's great, thanks. And I love the philosophy, and just wonder if you find that there's any challenges when you're not owning the work that you're a part of, in sort of making sure people that are funding you as a backbone, understand how you're helping the work of other organizations to be successful. Is that something that you have thought about in terms of how to make sure you're communicating that without taking credit for their work?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons for identifying responsible parties on our strategic plan dashboard, is to make sure that when something is achieved or accomplished, that the organizations that played a major role in accomplishing it are recognized. Another really effective way in ensuring strong collaboration is through funding as an incentive. And so we have acted as fiscal agent for a number of small and emerging nonprofits. And we have also done a lot of work in raising funds for collaborative programs and even funds for other organizations. So, this year it is an unusual year, but our overall budget is about $2 million, but the vast majority of that funding is distributed through subcontracting arrangements with partner organizations. So obviously when funding is available, that's another great way to facilitate collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mike. Looks like we have one more question and a bunch of thanks for sharing your wonderful story. But the question, let's see, what is your collective impact measurement system? Do you use a results-based scorecard? And this person is also hoping to get your email address, Mike.
Yeah, so you might be familiar with the book, Trying Hard is Not Good Enough by Mark Friedman. And that book kind of, for me at least, really seeded our methods for evaluating successful collective impact. But also the Collective Impact Forum I've gotten some pretty good tools from them to evaluate the success of a collective impact initiative, because with such a long runway and really confusing state assessment scores, we wanted to make sure we were able to track whether or not our collective impact role was effective and working. And so the Collective Impact Forum and Strive have been good resources for us to evaluate kind of the process of the collective impact initiative. But then ultimately we're still sticking with, we'll know this works if the number of kids reading proficiently increases. And then to get in touch with us, our website is turnthepagekc.org. My email address is just menglish@turnthepagekc.org. So feel free, we'd love to hear from anybody.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I think we'll wrap up now. I wanted to just say that from Sly James really inspirational comments about how you all got started, to Elle's comments about the importance of thinking about communications at every level of the work, to Dr. Turner's really like specific, detailed description of how to get the work going with school attendance and how to really respect parents and make sure that you're figuring out how to engage with families in ways that works for them. And then of course, Mike, just your leadership and the way you've talked about thinking about the initiative in general and sharing things that have worked for you in terms of sustainability. And also, you know, it's also so helpful to hear about some of the things that maybe don't work or that you think this is not the way to go. So I feel like I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate the generosity of sharing that you have given with in your strategies as well as your time. So thank you so much for that. And we'll look forward to seeing you all on one of these upcoming webinars. We have one later today on COVID-19 and learning loss, what the data tell us moving forward. The following week, we have the National Summer Learning Association talking about making the most of summer 2021 to boost learning. And then on February 9th, we'll be back on our regular schedule with the Crucible of Practice webinars with Star City Reads in Roanoke, Virginia at this time. And then after that, Technology's Roles in Accelerating Learning and Recovery at 3 on February 9th. Thanks all of you for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Have a great afternoon.